This is a Ford pickup I bought to resell, and it has a 302. And like many 302s of the early 90s vintage, it has low oil pressure. Now the first thing, of course, to do is put a mechanical gauge on it and make sure it actually has low oil pressure. And this one does. It has all the classic signs. It's fine and idle, and then as soon as it warms up, nothing. So I'm going to walk you through how to repair this, hopefully before you do any actual motor damage, by replacing the oil pump and the pickup screen. And I'm going to teach you how to do it without taking the motor out of the truck, even though it's four-wheel drive and has that axle in the way. So here you can see it. It's a hot day, but I just started the truck up and we're idling with 50 psi oil pressure. So, you know, that's okay. The reason why you've got the low oil pressure is probably worn bearings. But that doesn't mean that you can't still squeaker by for another 40 or 50,000 miles by throwing in a brand new oil pump and hopefully hopping up some of that oil pressure to begin with. You want to make sure that you actually have low oil pressure. Don't trust the Ford gauge, which is right now disconnected, because it's really just basically a resistance unit. It's a glorified idiot light with a resistor in it to help it go up and down. So double check that you actually have low oil pressure with mechanical gauge. And if this truck were warm, I'd driven it 20 miles or so, that needle would be right down basically at zero. It'd bounce a little bit. At the same time, you know, if you hear the lifters clatter, then you know there's basically no oil pressure. At no point do I ever hear the lifters clatter, but it's still too low. So we're gonna fix that. Get the truck up in the air some. It'll just help with the whole process. You don't want to go too high or you'll be fighting lifting the motor up, but you don't want it to be so low that you're always busting knuckles and running into the axle and stuff. So in this case I've backed it up onto the ramps. I don't know why, I always have, I like that better, and then I'll block behind the wheels. But the first thing you need to do is drain the oil, and because you're pulling the oil pan off, don't rush this. Pull the oil plug and walk away for an extensive period of time, an hour or two. If I'm going to resell this thing, the last thing I want is someone coming back with an issue right away, at least. I mean, old trucks are old trucks, but I don't want it to be right away. So I need to do something a little more extensive. If it's your own, it's possible that you've got something caught in the bypass valve, some carbon. These motors are pretty famous for carboning up. So you might put, I don't know, a can of Seafoam or some Rizlone in it and run it for a couple of thousand miles and see if it makes any difference. The chances of it making any difference are like zero, but it'll make you feel better before you actually have to get underneath this greasy beast and take her apart. God, this thing leaks everywhere. You might also go to the car wash and pressure wash the underside, get some degreaser on there, clean it up, because that would make your life simple. I wish I'd done that. It's a little late now, but I wish I'd done that. Another good idea is to drain the truck into a clean pan, which I didn't do. But if you drain it into a clean pan, then you can, after you empty it, check the bottom for chunks. And if it's chunks of carbon, you're probably on the right track. If it's chunks of anything else, then this is probably not going to help. When picking up an oil pump for your truck, and this one has 144,000, I don't think you really need super expensive. Let's face it, at 144,000 on a Ford 302, it's not like you've got another 160,000 miles left in the girl. But you do want a brand new one. You don't want a rebuild unit. So this is one. It's Melling. It's one I got online, cheap, and it'll be fine. The key feature is that it is brand new. That's what you want. You don't want a rebuild unit with used gears. You want brand new. One thing you want to make sure you do with your pump, and I would do it right away before you forget, just put a little bit of thick oil down inside. I'm not sure it matters which end, but some nice thick oil, some STP or you know, any one of the motor assembly lubes would be fine, or
Even a little squirt of gear oil, to be totally honest, would work just fine. But you want to make sure that it's not dry, and that'll help with the priming later on. This is the actual drive input, so you just put an Allen key in there and spin it with the Allen key for a little bit, and you can actually feel it pull that oil that you drop in there and squishing around. Now for the dirty part, getting the old one out. Before you lift the motor, you want to check for short wires and hoses. In this case, I got some really long radiator hoses. I think they'll be fine, and I believe we have enough room for everything. Go slow, check often. It's always good to have somebody here up top, and the last thing you ever want to do is force it. One of the first things you're going to want to do is to pull the exhaust, mostly so it can drop down a bit out of the way, and pull the shift linkage so that you don't put undue stress on the rest of the truck. And I believe that can be done right here. Just pull the pivot point and that mounting bolt right there. That should drop out of the way. Then you're going to want to undo the transmission mount. Don't lift it, and undo both of the motor mounts, and then don't lift it yet. You'll go back and you'll lift the transmission first, probably an inch and a half, and then you'll move forward and start on the motor and see how high you can get it without crushing anything. And you do probably want to keep your eye on the valve covers and whatnot. So pull all of the bolts out of the oil pan. Slip the oil pan gasket down and around underneath the pan and get it out. There's no easy way to do it. I mean, it's just a royal bitch, but you can get your hands in there. You can get the bolts loose. You can get the oil pump out. You cannot get the oil pan out. The key thing is to just have that motor as high as you possibly can, and take your time and realize that it's going to be astronomically frustrating, but still probably easier than pulling the motor and faster, unless you have some professional tools. It's going to be faster than pulling your motor. Now when you pull the oil pump out, this shaft, which is what drives it, is going to fall out as well. And the trick I found to get it in is take a big speaker magnet and magnetize the end of it, and that'll help itself hold up in there, because it's in there vertically and it just drops out. So see if you can magnetize it and get it to stay in there, and if you can't, try smearing some really heavy grease, just a little bit on that end, and see if you can get it to stay in there that way. If you can't get it to stay in there, I don't know what you're going to do, because there certainly is not enough room to wiggle and align everything. Not with my hands and arms anyways. So magnetize the shaft, see if you can get it to stay stuck into the distributor, and you should be good to go. Okay, so I glued just a whisper of silicone, the gasket onto the one side, just the one side. Yes, good dog. And I ended up the octagon rod is the rod that connects the distributor and drives the oil pump. I ended up getting it to stay in there by putting silicone on the end and letting it tack up 4 or 5 minutes before I stuffed it up in there. And I'm hoping it'll keep it up in there long enough for me to get that thing in place. Okay, so all done, and at cold idle we have an additional 10 psi. So, it worked. The thing is, it ain't gonna fix your worn out motor. It's just having a brand new oil pump as opposed to your worn out oil pump can help you push a little more oil a few more places a little faster, and it might give you what you need, especially when the motor gets hot. So what I need to do now is take the old girl out for a test run and see where she decides to settle out. Hopefully not at 0 like last time. And there we have it. Hot idle, 600 RPMs, and we're at what, 20 psi or so, which is plenty. And it's 20 psi higher than it was when I started the project. So yeah, you've lost oil pressure because the motor is worn, but you've also lost oil pressure because the oil pump is worn. And while replacing the oil pump will not fix the motor, it's probably enough to keep you going. I ain't saying it's easy, I'm just saying you can do it. And contrary to what you might read on a lot of the forums, it'll probably work. Alright, big hill climb. Back at home now. It's idling at 600 RPMs, and you'll see that I've got about 8 psi oil pressure at idle. That's perfectly acceptable in an old truck. In fact, my Jeep is spec'd at 3 at idle, and this would be enough to keep the oil pressure light from coming on. So to recap what I did: 144,000 miles, 302, low oil pressure, very common problem. 2050 motor oil, couldn't keep the oil pressure from dropping and setting the light off at idle in gear, so that's less than 3 psi. I replaced the oil pump, I made no other changes, new filter, and I now have 10 psi at idle in gear. So that's what I did. It worked. Hope you get lucky. Keep them on the road as long as you can. Thanks for watching.